love the title.
Okay, so my project I named Be Productive because I'm trying to inspire people to make a difference rather than ignore it. And my first object is a pine cone, which relates to the tree project we've been working on with Sid Gent, our groundskeeper. And then my second object is part of a banner for a soccer team I coached, and they were the bumblebees. So that relates to my bead project. Okay. So the problem is colony collapse disorder. All of the bees, not just honeybees, are rapidly decreasing in numbers, and there's several causes, but just nobody knows about it. I did a survey and most people did not. And then to fix this problem, I worked with Katerina to put a garden on campus that would be bee friendly and drought tolerant to try and boost the populations. And my experience was overall pretty good. I mean, I felt like I was making a difference even though it was just small, seemingly small actions. But I mean, I made a lot of connections with people that I wouldn't have if I hadn't done this project. And I guess that was my motivating factor, was I hadn't really interacted with anyone on campus before. So, and then the challenges were getting the plants and getting the garden approved. But it also was pretty successful because all of the plants are out there right now. But unfortunately, I just looked and 2 of them were eaten, so somewhat successful, but we'll keep revising it. That's my hope. And then I already brought up CCD, it's colony collapse disorder, and you can see on this chart that starting in 2006 is when they began declining, and not just in the winter, all year long. In the winter, it's normal for about 15% loss, but in some years, you can see it gets closer to about 45 on average all year. And then there are like really drastic cases that have been up to 90%. So this is just an average, but it gets much higher. And then, yeah. So probable causes are habitat loss, pesticide use, climate like drought and overheating, and then pollution. So this is directly impacting not only honeybees, but native bees, especially because, mostly because of habitat loss, because a lot of them don't live in hives. They live solitary on native plants, and well, some live in dunes, and it gets like combed over by cement and just all of the building of new houses and everything, and a whole population in San Francisco, I believe it was lost due to that. So the native bees are really hurting, and that's why we need to work on preserving the habitat and including more native plants. But it also relates to honeybees. I talked to a local beekeeper from the Valley Hive, and he told me that the honeybees are actually starving from the lack of plants. And these plants are dying due to drought and overheating. So these plants, to combat that issue, we need to obviously work on the drought because that's part of it. And then there just needs to be more plants for the bees to survive. And then my goal was to make an impact on the bee population, but also just the environment in general, because that's always something I've cared about. I like the outdoors, and it saddens me to see trash everywhere or just like dying habitats. And I made a small impact, but I'd say it probably will inspire others to do the same thing, which was my hope. And the significance is hopefully others will recognize this, and companies like Disney will be able to recognize the issue and work to fund research. And yeah, and so the next slide. You can incorporate bee hotels around the community for the native bees that don't live in hives. And then another solution is ecological farming, which would eliminate the issue of pesticides that are killing most honeybees and a lot of native bees too, which is why they're all dying so rapidly. And ecological farming is basically organic farming, and it helps not only other environmental issues like drought, but it doesn't kill any of the surrounding habitat either. And then countries such as Europe have already made changes, which is why we should follow suit. They've banned the use of neonics, and that's the group of the most harmful pesticides for pollinators like bees and other insects. And so, for the next slide. I already talked about California native plants, and I believe that to be the best solution, at least in our community, is because it provides shelter and a lot of their food, and there's just not enough of those plants due to, most people like to make their gardens pretty, but that doesn't necessarily benefit all of the native species because they depend on pollen and nectar and things that aren't necessarily applicable to native insects. They can't just survive off of any plant. And so one of the plants we chose in our garden was woolly blue curls. They are bee friendly. They have a lot of pollen and nectar. They are drought tolerant, and they are a California native plant, which meets all of the requirements we wanted for our garden. And it's actually one of the plants that survived. So that's good. And there's up close, the bees seem to like it. So. Okay. Got it. Okay, I thought that was the same slide. So with the California native plants, a local company called SCV Water is incentivizing the community to remove their lawns and put native plants in their place, which would not only help the drought issue, which is what they're mostly targeting, it would also help the biodiversity issue by increasing the amount of diversity of pollinators and insects just in our area, which if everybody took that amount of effort and tried to help in their yard alone, there would be a dramatic impact. And if a small company like SCV Water can do it, then a big company could have a huge impact like Disney, and I believe they should start funding this sort of solution. So next steps, I wanted to volunteer at the Valley Hive, where I interviewed the beekeeper, because he said I could learn a lot about the process and what they're dealing with, so I wanted to get a little more insight on that. And then I also want to revise my own yard, because I know grass doesn't help drought and it doesn't support any wildlife, so I'd like to be able to, I probably can't remove all my grass, but at least some of it to get more biodiversity just in my yard. And then, did I make an impact? I believe I did, even though it was a small one. I'm learning that small actions are just as important because it gets the ball rolling, you know. And I believe I will continue to by doing the steps that I talked about. And for this reason, it'll be worth it because I believe I've found this issue to be pretty important to me, because every time I've ever done a project like this, it's been on the environment. So I'm finding this is something I care about and want to make better in the world. Okay, and here's one of the plants. His name is Ferb. This is the first plant Katerina and I planted, and he's doing well, I'd say. So Katerina and I worked with Professor Jeannie Cherry. She is a biology professor here, and she helped us get all of our plants and get approval for the garden and everything. And we also met with Anthony Michaelides, that's his name. And he was a big help in this too, and now, like I said, we've made those connections, and I think I'm better off for it. And then my friend Monica from my chemistry class and Cindy also helped us with the garden, so we were able to reach a lot of people. And yeah, there's Katerina. We learned teamwork and community engagement by working on this project together. So there are the plants. Unfortunately, both of the apricot mallows were chewed off, so it's just a little bit of a stump. But the other ones are doing just fine, so maybe we'll have to replace the mallows with something that's not as bunny enticing. But these are the plants we chose because they met most of our requirements about being bee friendly and drought tolerant and beneficial for our environment. Okay, and this is the tree project. Like I said, we met with Sid Gent, our groundskeeper. I actually interviewed him, and he believes trees are important for maintaining the balance in our environment, and I agree. Like, it provides shelter and it helps air pollution, which is another thing that bees aren't able to survive like many other creatures. So we learned a lot in the tree project, and on the next slide, you see we learned how to stratification to seeds, which is basically tricking them into believing that it's winter by creating winter-like conditions so they can sprout. Katerina was more successful than I was. She has a few sprouted, mine did not make it, but you can see we learned a lot. And in summary, I learned small actions create big results. Actions influence others. We learned new skills like how to properly garden and plant native plants, because you have to do it differently than you would for any other plant. And we learned how to stratify seeds. And then I learned that environmental conservation is one of my passions, and I actually changed my major because all my life my dad and everyone else was telling me I need to be a doctor or someone important, you know. But I think this can be just as important, so that's what I'm working towards. And then, in summary, bee populations are declining. Bees depend on native plants and habitat restoration. We should ban the use of neonics and adopt ecological farming, and you can make a difference by planting California natives.